when Andrew first reached out to me, I was like, you want me to come and speak at a visual effects school? It's not usually on my list of speaking engagements. So I was like, okay, I'll happily do it. So first of all, like, how many musicians are there here? Like, even if you play an instrument, but you're now studying like VFX. Oh, okay. And how many of you are doing VFX here at home? Everyone? Okay. So half. And Andrew said that there were some composers and musicians from outside. Could you raise your hand, please? Okay. Okay, so we've got kind of a mix. Next, how many of you have played Ori and the Blind Forest? How many of you have never heard of Ori and the Blind Forest? Okay. Shame on you. Not really, it's okay. Okay, and I will get started. Okay, so I'm terrible grammar. I'm Gareth Coker, and I wrote the music for Ori and the Blind Forest. I've also worked on Ark Survival Evolved. I've done some work on Minecraft, and I'm currently starting work on the sequel to Ori and the Blind Forest, which is Ori and the Will of the Wisps. So I'm here today to talk about like why Ori is special. Ori is obviously appealing to you guys because it has a very, very strong visual component. And I'm going to talk about a little bit about the process of like what it was like to work with the artists, and actually how you guys probably work in kind of a vacuum. Do you guys ever interact with other people like outside visual effects crew at the moment while you're here? They don't interact yet. Right. Yeah, I'm the same. I'm just like locked away in the studio until I'm done. Okay, so part of the goal of this is to like make you understand like the work you do, even though you might seem like you're locked away in your cubicle, working on each pixel. I'm not going to try and use visual effects terms because I'll just be in visual trouble. But like, your work has like a really big impact on every other department, even though you might not know it. I'm going to go into that a little bit later. The way this thing came together, we all think something special happened during the process. Even still today, I think Ori is still the highest rated new intellectual property on the Xbox, which I think maybe says more about Xbox than it does Ori. But 88 is a pretty good score. It's the studio's first game. And one of the strengths of the game is, like, individually, I think we're all pretty good. I feel like I'm okay at music. Our art team feels like they're pretty good at art. Our programmers feel like they're pretty good at programming. Our designers feel like they're good at designing. But for a multitude of reasons, like, while the individual parts were really strong, they were able to come together and be harmonized in a game in what we think is a truly great way. Now, when I first started working on this game, there were about 6 people involved, and it gradually expanded to about 25 at the end of production. And just some of the countries that we were involved, that were involved in making the game. So I'm in LA, our sound team was in Atlanta, our programming team was in Australia, Israel, and Holland. Our art team was in Germany and England. Our animation team was in England and Holland. And our 2 co-founders were in Austria and Israel. Now this might not be so unusual like in 2017, but when we got started in 2013, the whole make a game remotely was still pretty unusual. I mean, just organizing meetings, like getting started from the get-go was like pretty crazy, because someone would have to get up at like 5 o'clock in the morning just to have a meeting, which isn't fun. So this is some of the team at our launch party, and then this is some of the team that we never met, because maybe because Microsoft were too cheap to fly them out. Yeah, so I went through, and that's not uncommon, but like, you know, even some of these people, I didn't meet until the launch party. In fact, I didn't even meet the sound designer until the launch party, which is pretty crazy because sound and music working together is quite important. Yeah, I didn't meet them until the launch party, and it worked out pretty great. So, did we get lucky? Not really. It's just a communication thing, which is what I'm going to get into next. So, first reason why I think the game did well is because when we started, we knew exactly what we were going to make. And I'm going to show you guys the game a little bit later. I'm going to show you excerpts of the game, just so you can have some context for what I'm talking about now. I just wanted to get all the talking out of the way at the beginning. So, Ori is what we would describe as a beautiful and tight Metroidvania platform. Does anyone not know what the term Metroidvania means? Okay, someone explain what a Metroidvania is. Because I don't want to explain it, because I'll get it wrong.
A tight, pixel-perfect 2D platformer where you have to target other enemy objects, shoot them, and then jump from one platform to another, avoiding enemies along the way. There's a big story involved.
So the Metroidvania part is really just like you are kind of dropped off in the world and you can basically explore anywhere. Personally speaking, like the Act 1 of Ori, it's kind of, you have to follow a set path. It doesn't really become a true Metroidvania until Act 2. But basically, it's, whereas some games are like scripted, you follow like every action and the outcome is always the same. This you can kind of have a little bit of chance to explore the world. So we, at least initially, this was the target of people who we were looking at. Those of you, I'm pretty sure you guys are all aware of Cuphead, because that's obviously another visual masterpiece. That's the kind of people that we were aiming at. Now, Ori is nowhere near as difficult as Cuphead. I played Cuphead 2 weeks ago. I nearly broke my television. And that was just on level 1. Not the tutorial though, I didn't screw up the tutorial. Some of you may have heard about the journalist who couldn't get past the tutorial. So anyway, this was who we were making it for. But eventually it became clear that it wasn't going to be enough just to make a really difficult, hardcore game because of how it looked. Nothing about, maybe not that image, but nothing about this image says, I'm really difficult and challenging. So we had to soften up the difficulties and make things a little bit more consistent with the visuals. For those of you who've played Ori, how many of you thought it was a difficult game? Okay, you guys are gaining a lot because a lot of people thought it was too difficult. But well, that's good. I'm glad you didn't think it was difficult. So the way Moon Studios works, I won't spend too much time on this. It's a flat organization. And what a flat organization means is that I, as the music composer, have the same status as the lead artist. So if I think a visual is terrible, I can say a visual is terrible and I will give feedback directly to that artist, no matter how horrible it is to hurt that person's feelings. Now, conversely, that artist can say, I think your music's terrible. We don't put it quite like this, I'm just being this blunt to get my point across. It basically means you kind of have to have a thick skin, but because we're a reasonably small team, it means we can just deal with feedback like that very quickly. And the way we deal with issues is if multiple people agree with the first person that says, Gareth, that music track is terrible. If 10 people agree with that, then I have to solve it. If no one agrees with that person, well, tough shit. I would basically. So problems are dealt with kind of like a triage system. They're prioritized by the rest of the team. So one person raises an issue, the rest of the team looks at it, and if they agree, it's just a simple thumbs up or thumbs down. It sounds chaotic, but if everyone does it the same way, it actually kind of works. And it's really, if you don't have a centralized office, it's kind of the best way to work when everyone's dotted around all over the place. that's important. This is actually an important thing. So, like I said, when I want to complain about an artist's work or an animation not quite working, or perhaps like the flow of gameplay isn't working that great, we try to give feedback and in a way that like can make the other person understand like why something isn't working. For example, there was a scene in the game. After a really difficult bit of gameplay, and at the end you reach like the top of the world, and the visual was just some clouds and an obelisk, and I'm like, really? That's all we're going to give the player after they've done this really challenging bit of gameplay? And it wasn't that the visual was bad, it was just missing something, and I was just like, hey, what if, you guys had some trees poking through the clouds in the background, or what if we had like a mountain in the background, just like something extra, and then it stops becoming critical because you're thinking about like what is the gamer going to experience. And I think like that's probably the most important thing that like we all remembered like while making this game. It's how to put yourself in the gamer's shoes as opposed to being just an artist. One of the things I did a lot was I tested the game relentlessly. I don't get paid for testing the game. Composers get paid to write music. You guys get paid to make art, but no one pays you to test the game. But if I didn't test it, no person doing actual testing is going to listen to the music and say, does the music work not just in level 1, but does it work from level 1 into level 2, into level 3, into level 4? All the real testers are doing, they're just thinking, does the music play, and does it sound okay? Which isn't quite enough. So one thing I would encourage you to do, if you're not doing it already, is to play your games that you're working on as much as possible. It's something all of our artists at Moon Studios do. It takes a lot of time, and you don't get paid for it. I believe you should get paid for it, but good luck negotiating that with your employer. But it is something that I think is really important. When I play other games, I can tell if the composer has played the game or not, just based on how it feels. Probably the best example of that I can think of recently is the most recent Doom game. Now, like, Doom a lot of people dismiss Doom because it has, it's just a heavy metal electronic soundtrack. I'm like, well, no, it isn't really. Like, the pace of the music is constantly changing based on how intense the gameplay is. And Doom already starts at intense, so it really just goes up to intense and super intense. But the music does the same thing. He managed to somehow make a genre of music which I never listened to enjoyable to listen to. And it's because I know for a fact that he tested the game like crazy. I've already gone through that. Skip that. Okay. I think I'm going to pause on this first. I think I'm going to fire up the game. Give me a sec. Okay. Cheese. Okay, we're safe. I'm going to talk while the initial music gets out of the way. So, just a fun little story about that opening clip. So, the singer, Airly Brighton, I spent months looking for the right singer for this game. I just couldn't find the right voice. I think it was a late night YouTubing, which I think we've all done. I wasn't looking at cat videos, but some singers do sound like cats, so not all of them. But anyway, so eventually I ended up, I was looking at singers and I found this one voice on YouTube, and I was like, okay, let's give that person a try because it sounds reasonably close to what I'm looking for. And so I messaged her. And amazingly, she lived like 10 minutes away from my house. Which I know there's a lot of super talented people in Los Angeles, but given how big YouTube is, I just was not expecting that kind of luck, which meant we could pretty much make it happen quickly. She only came onto the game about a month before we did our first E3 trailer. So once I decided that she was the voice of the game, we had to move pretty quickly. Yeah, anyway, so the opening, that's the opening of the game, and this actually isn't Ori, this is Naru. Yeah, I'm going to play through the next section of the prologue. Naru's very slow, so we're going to break So, one of the things that the prologue, what we're playing right now is the prologue, and this took about 4 months to work on, and it's 4 months for about 10 minutes of gameplay, which is not a lot, but it's really important in setting the mood of the game. In the prologue, there are actually about 25 different pieces of music, but if I've done my job correctly, it really should feel continuous, all the way from the beginning right to the final end. The reason there are so many different little pieces of music is because, like right now, I'm doing nothing, and the music has to keep playing, otherwise it breaks the mood. If it just gets to the end, then we're just going to have the sound of the forest, and it's going to kind of take the player out. But as soon as we approach this leaf next, the music's going to change dynamically and hopefully feel like it's a smooth transition. So just for the benefit of the composers I know here, if you're looking to make smooth transitions musically, you should use sound effects as your cover, because it works every single time, like without fail. It's totally a legitimate technique, and it can solve a lot of problems. Okay. And again, you can stay in here, jump around, and not continue playing the music you're playing. And then, as we go outside, rushing through for the benefit of this tool. Most players spend usually a little bit more time here because it's quite beautiful. Now, when I did the music for all of the prologue, most of the art wasn't in there. So the way we did cutscenes, and I'm going to go into this in a little bit more depth later, the way we did cutscenes is I would get storyboards from the concept artists. I would compose to the storyboards, and then if I wanted to tweak the length of a certain storyboard, I would just change it in a video editor, which is really easy. Even a composer can do that. And that would mean I could write a piece of music that felt natural and flowed well, and then once I was happy with the music and like feeling like it flowed like a good piece of music, then it got handed back to the artists and animation teams, and they'd animate it and set dress it, and then everything would be timed reasonably close to like 100% accuracy. That's very unconventional. Normally, composers are getting usually a reasonably well animated thing with like all the timings kind of locked in place, and it's like write music to that, and there's not a huge amount of flexibility in timings. I can do it that way as well, but this way is way more fun, and it usually leads to a more coherent result. So if you ever end up making your own games, then I would encourage you to like get your composer on board as early as possible, like when you're storyboarding, rather than just like giving them a bunch of videos that they have to work with. Yeah, the result is what I think is like a prologue that feels like quite tight between visuals and music. Section originally all playable, like the narrator could walk across the entire environment, but we had to cut it because the narrator's so freaking slow. That little scene just before this scene and just after Naru dies, I had a massive argument with the director. I think I got fired like 5 times. But he was like, we've got to have music because this is when Ori's leaving home. I'm like, no we don't. We don't need any music. What music is going to be more powerful than like the power of silence? And this is like, this is a problem that a lot of games have. They're afraid to use silence because silence, most people don't think of silence as music, but actually it can be the most powerful. I'm sure you've all been to see horror films. The reason why you jump is because there's long periods of silence, or when you're just hearing ambiances. And it's the same in a game like this as well. But our director is very old school. He loves all of the games, like from all the Nintendo games from the 90s, which have constant catchy music, and it never ever stops, not for 1 second. And that's fine if you're making a game that is supposed to be like it was made in the 1990s. But this is a game that was released in 2015, like the aesthetic has moved on. It's actually something that we're like constantly thinking about for the sequel, because gaming has moved on even from just 2015 when we released this to whenever we release the next game. I almost big error there. Yeah, so like it's something we're paying attention to. It's about like following the trends and like what people are enjoying. Like I think there was a period of time when games I think got too easy, and I think now we're kind of going back the other way. People really love Bloodborne, people really love Dark Souls, people really love Cuphead. There is a balance between being difficult and then being satisfying when you actually finish a difficult sequence, as opposed to just being obnoxiously difficult, like Super Meat Boy. Which is also an amazing game, but my god, test your patience. So yeah, just like that previous scene, it was interesting because Thomas, our director, he just really wanted music there. And I could understand, like, by itself, like why you would want music for that scene. And this is the other important thing. I talked about making games in a vacuum, like when we're all like locked away in our studios or cubicles or whatever. It's the same like when you're creating art, when you're creating music. If you're thinking just about one level, then yeah, that's fine. It might be good for that level, but you need to think about it contextually and how it relates to everything else. And that is super important, especially for a narrative game like this. Some of you, maybe all of you, will end up becoming like animation directors or art directors or whatever. It can be very easy, especially when you head into crunch time, just to get bogged down with like, I need to make another 1,000 mushrooms or 3,000 flowers or whatever, and not think about the bigger picture. And one of the successes of this game is that every single department is thinking about the big picture, not just, I need to render another 100 blades of grass. Does that make sense? Okay. We're almost done with the prologue. And then what we would consider the game proper starts after this. So that opening usually takes most players about 10 to 12 minutes. It's the only place where we do that kind of gameplay where everyone's walking really slowly and the camera's super zoomed in. If you had a sequence like that in the middle of the game, after like doing all this cool stuff as a platformer, it would feel absolutely terrible. We did want to do it, but after you've been playing a high-speed platformer, I mean, just for context, this is how quickly Ori moves, which is a lot quicker than I still can't do that. It's a lot quicker than what you're used to in the prologue. So yeah, that's why we front-loaded it, and hopefully it provides the motivation for the player to go on for this. Okay, I'm going to jump back to the PowerPoint. So one of the things that was interesting, and like this comes back to like testing things out and seeing how your work looks in the game. So we had a made-up language for the game, and that was one of the biggest debates in the team for the whole production. It was one of the issues that got raised, and then like there were like 10 thumbs up and 10 thumbs down, so it was like pretty much a coin toss. And eventually we had to make both versions to hear what things sounded like. So what we ended up with was the universal language spiritually, but we did actually make the English spiritually, which thankfully it sounded absolutely terrible, and I have bought it today. Let's see, here it is. It just sounds like really bad dubbed, translated, and the voice actor is a guy who works on League of Legends. Like he knows what he's doing. He's like one of the top voice actors that could have gotten for the spiritual role. I think the only better voice would have been like Morgan Freeman or someone like that. Morgan Freeman. So here's no one's ever seen this apart from a handful of other talks. So this is not something we show publicly. Oh, that's right, I have to close PowerPoint. It's fun, but it's just super corny. At least it is to me. I mean, maybe you guys love it. Does anyone like that compared to what they had? Okay, we're going to position. But I mean, also there's other issues involved too. So the reason why it was even a debate is because if we had a real language, then that means we don't have to use text. And not using text in a game like this is fantastic because it highlights all visual work. So it was either have language and have it sound like that, or have the text boxes which appear on the screen. I think, fortunately, it was good that the English thing sounded good. But if the English, let's say the English is, it was fortunate the English sounded bad. But let's say the English had actually sounded good, I still think we wouldn't have done it, because if you produce it in English, it's a Microsoft game. You've got to do French, German, Italian, Spanish, Japanese, Korean, Chinese, Russian, and then you've like gone over budget. Ori's not a big budget game, by the way. We're very fortunate that we were able to find like this universal language thing, which was actually made up by our singer. She has a gift for like coming up with weird native, well not native times, weird sounds and weird things that sound like the language. And so we were lucky that ended up working. So yeah, it's just some little behind the scenes thing. The next behind the scenes thing I'm going to show you is, earlier I talked about how I was writing music to storyboards and how my work can sometimes inform the final product. So what I'm going to show you, it's a scene from the end of Act 1, and this was done from a time when Ori was a square and all the levels were just basically geometry. But you guys will probably be familiar with this kind of thing, because you guys probably see work like this more often. But I'm going to show you like how I treated a scene in two different ways musically, and then the final result. So that's Ori in the middle. Okay, so that's the first one I did. We're going to play the second one and I'm going to talk about them a little bit. What's the main difference between these two?
Sense of danger. The first one sounds like that thing's gonna rip his face off. The second one sounds like
Yeah, so both would probably work, but the first is like the owl is the villain, and the second is the owl might be the villain. And my first version was based like just on seeing that art, because like when I just see something black and white, and like that to me like initially read as scary, because like I didn't know like what the plan was for the final visuals was, and then the director talked me through it a little bit and said it's not going to be as dark and crazy as this, so can you try and soften it up a little bit, and that was what the result in the second one was. So here's what ends up being the final version. We ended up somewhere in the middle. Ori spends a lot of time falling in the game. He really does. Like, he always manages to survive. So yeah, that's just an example of like how we probably could have shipped the first version that I showed you, and honestly, I don't think most people would notice, but like it's that kind of attention to detail you kind of have to put in, and you know, it doesn't just go for music, it goes for art as well, because there's like a million different ways the artist could have made that scene feel, and that's what we ended up on. One thing again, I'm not going to say that I like know all of the technical details, like about how the visuals get made, but obviously I respond to what I see. That's my job. And even just like the post-production, just when they're changing brightness and contrast, or what's the word, the levels of saturation, like that actually has a big impact, more than you might realize, on how a composer is going to respond to your work. We're not just looking at the basic story. Like the story is the most important thing, But what the visuals do is they inform what kind of instruments we're going to use. You ask any composer, like, they're going to tell you the story is the most important thing, and like, how do you decide what instruments to use? Obviously, like, in this kind of game, you can kind of do anything. It's a fantasy game, other than like heavy metal, obviously. On April Fools, I did put a dubstep track in there, which they were not happy about. But I've got something very special planned for the next April Fools. So we argued and went back and forth. And again, basically, when I can't get my point across in words, generally we just have to go out and make it. And if you're like having a creative difference with anyone that you're working with, often the best solution is just to present two options. They're always going to choose one. One is always going to be better than the other. That's how our brains work. So I'm going to show you a video which shows the two different approaches. So one is where the music is super weird, kind of more like mixing with the sound design, and then the other, you should be able to tell the difference pretty easily. It's more like typical peppy boss gameplay music. The music switches every time you refresh. So, did you hear the little snippet of peppy music? If we'd done that for the whole thing, it kind of cheapens the whole experience. As soon as you add, Ori is a game that's like famous for its melody, which is nice for me. Thomas, our director, loved it so much he just wanted to put it in like every single scene. I do use it a lot, but as soon as you add a melody to something, you're giving it momentum. And taking the melody out in this case, because it's the one of the few times in the game where you kind of have to stop. Almost all of the gameplay, you are constantly moving. Therefore, the music needs to have momentum. But here, once you take the momentum out of the music, hey, it matches the visuals a lot better. So that was an argument that I won, again. But only because I made the alternate version. Unfortunately, it was actually pretty easy to make the alternate version because we already had a bunch of music written, so I was just like, oh, let's put it in. I know it's going to sound terrible, but I'm going to show how terrible it is now. Once the team saw it, it was like, yep, we're going with the more ambient sound design approach. Okay. I think I'll jump back into the game. Right. So when I'm talking about so sound design is usually made up of three components: ambiances, like the air conditioner in here is an ambient, then there's dialogue, and then actual like Foley sound effects, which is like footsteps or wing flapping. And sometimes, especially in horror games, there comes a point where the music becomes so weird that it starts to also become like a sound effect, and the two can kind of like end up merging together, which is kind of what we did there. Like there's a lot of stuff in the music track that also sounds like it could be a sound effect, but it's written in a musical way, so you can still like understand this piece of music. If you play horror games, just play any of the Dead Space games if you want to, if you're into that, and you'll see a great example, like where the music is all just like really harsh grinding sounds, and the game, you're inside a really claustrophobic ship, and it's lots of harsh grinding sounds, and then there's monsters, which are a lot of harsh grinding sounds, and they all kind of blend together in a way that makes it seem like a cohesive whole. Did I answer the question? Okay, good. All right, where should we go? Let's cheat. Let's go to the fun part. Note that I just put the sound effects a lot lower than the music, obviously. So this is like one of the big set play sequences, which hopefully I'm not going to screw up. So the player here, they've been playing probably for about 5 or 6 hours, and this part here is kind of the calm before the storm. The music here, again, it's about matching the visuals. Like we've got like kind of lots of pinks and greens here, which are quite warm colors to me. Therefore, the music is also supposed to be kind of warm. We're also inside a tree, so like that low bassy instrument is just a really low marimba, which is kind of like a xylophone. It's just the wood's slightly different, and I just used like as many sounds like that were generated that could sound like they were inside a tree, and then combine them like with the magical feel like that the things oranges and greens create. And again, the Ginza tree didn't always look like this. For a long time, it was really, really, really blue, and that would have changed. That would have completely changed the kind of instruments I chose for this section. So this part takes really long, so I'm just going to cheat and go here. Try and do this bit properly. So this next sequence, which you're about to see, took us about 2 months to nail. It was the first, so whereas earlier you saw when the tree was lighting up, that was the first scene we showed Microsoft. This is like what the final game will kind of look like. This is basically a boss sequence that's coming up. And this is the first thing that we kind of showed to them, and if like we got this wrong, then we kind of had to start from square one. Fortunately, this ended up probably being the most famous or infamous, depending on how many times you died, sequence in game. basically, I actually think it's one of the most important pieces of music in the game. By itself, it might sound fairly unremarkable. It kind of sounds like Finding Nemo music, but that's not really the role of the music here. So you just come through that really intense, quite difficult gameplay experience. Most people do not finish that on the first try, and most people certainly do not get all of the yellow abilities. So you come through that very difficult sequence, then you have another big cutscene, you have another cutscene where he's falling down, and then finally he wakes up here, and the color palette is completely changed. And so visually, anyone who's playing already is feeling a completely different emotion just in terms of the visuals, because these visuals are not harsh and they're not high contrast like the visuals at the top of the Ginzo tree, which we just finished. And so the music here acts as a calming influence, because that sequence is very difficult because you have only been playing the game for about 4 to 5 hours. We have similar sequences later on in the game, but I actually think they're easier because you've been playing the game longer, so they're a little bit more fun to play. But that was the first time you've done it, and this is almost kind of like a meditative moment for the player. And again, I talked about this earlier, I could have done the music for this level and not thought about how it relates in context to everything else. And it probably would have been okay, but hopefully you notice that from the very beginning of that chase scene, right through the cutscenes, right through into here, the whole thing is seamless. You can't do that if you're playing the game in isolation and just doing one level at a time. You have to play it in much bigger chunks, which is just going to take up a lot of your time, sadly. Game testers do not, in my experience, and we had access to Microsoft's massive game testing, all of their resources, and it's not the kind of thing they look for. They're looking mostly for technical stuff. What I'm looking for, and what our art director is looking for, and what our director is looking for is flow from one level right into another, right into the next one. Does everything take you on a journey, and does it flow smoothly from one thing to another? And I think the very, very best games do that expertly well. They make you feel like you're on a journey without it feeling like you're playing lots of little different chunks. One of the things that transformed my writing the music for the game was when our programming team said, "Hey, we've got no loading screens anymore." And I'm like, "You're kidding, we've got no loading screens in this massive game? How have you done that? I don't really care." Because so really now, you fire up the game and you'll never see a loading screen after you've seen the initial, after the game reaches the main menu. When that happened, it means it's really difficult to break immersion. How many of you played Bloodborne? How many minutes did you spend waiting on loading screens? Right? That's not the loading screens are bad, but what loading screens do is time to get a coffee, time to get a boat or whatever. But if you don't have any loading screens, it's just another thing that removes breaking immersion. For a single player narrative game, especially like this, and especially with visuals like this, if you have nothing breaking it up, the only thing that can break it up is you, the player. So the only thing that can stop you playing is you by pressing the start button. But most people, once they're in and nothing breaks their concentration, they just want to keep playing. And I know this because I've seen people who don't play platformers, like my father. My father is 66 and he finished Ori. So so anyone who says it's too difficult, I just give them that story. I've seen people play the game and they're like, "Oh, I'm not interested in games, I never play games, but you worked in it, so I guess I'll give it a go." And they play it for usually at least 3 hours, because there's nothing breaking your immersion. So when it comes to music, that's also kind of what I'm trying to do. It's I'm trying to find any way not to break the immersion. And honestly, it's the same with visuals, because going from one scene to the next, it needs to feel like a smooth transition. It can't feel jarring. Like, we experimented a lot with different, I remember experimenting a lot with different color palettes and different designs, especially for the chase sequence. And it looked different all the time, but now it feels like a gradual progression. This is stuff you can't figure out unless you test the game religiously. So you should all lobby when you're all working for giant corporations getting paid hundreds of thousands of dollars to get paid for your testing time too. I mean, there are people at Microsoft testing the game, but like they're not testing it thinking about the big vision. You need to think about the small stuff, and you need to think about the big vision. If that's one thing you can go away from today, that's like what I would like implore you to remember. It's so easy to get lost in our like very singular disciplines. I get lost in writing music all the time. I can sometimes forget like what I'm actually working on, and then I might write what I think is an amazing piece of music, and I put it in the game, and it totally doesn't work because I wasn't thinking about the game. I was just thinking about, oh, how can I make the best piece of music ever? Often it's not about making the best piece of music ever, it's about making the most appropriate piece of music for the gamer at that time. And that's why this music basically sounds like Finding Nemo and super relaxing. At least I think. So I'll do a couple more quick jump arounds, and then I've got a cool thing which we're going to try before we finish.
I have a question.
Yes, Chris.
Those ripples moving to the music at all?
No.
They said it kind of seemed like it.
Total luck, that is. Let's see.
Gareth, throughout the whole development, how much yin and yang was there between you as a composer and the art team? I mean, because it seems like there's such an interplay between the beautiful visuals inspiring music, and then the music probably also inspiring the art in some way too. How much back and forth is there in that process?
With the cutscenes, music kind of informed the art and animation, and with the gameplay, like, I don't really get it, like, until like some of the visual, like okay, it kind of comes and happens in two stages. So with the gameplay, imagine none of the art here, or is a square. What that allows me to do, it allows me to establish the tempo and the speed. But it's impossible to choose like what kind of instruments, because I can't see it. But as soon as the visuals come in, then I know like the palette, and then because I already have the melody, it's really, I'm just taking the music that I wrote like a year ago, and then just adapting it for whatever instruments I'm choosing. So yes is the short answer to your question, but there's a lot of back and forth. Like, so when I'm like working on the gameplay just without the visuals, I'm not really worried about like what the instruments are going to be. Like, I'll just go with, sounds terrible, like the generic Ori sound, whatever that is, whatever I think the generic Ori sound is. And just get something that feels right with the speed of the gameplay, and then when the visuals come, I choose the instruments. So it's constant back and forth. It can be frustrating sometimes because the visuals can change quite late in the day, or sometimes even worse, the gameplay can change even late in the day. And when it changes the pace, it changes everything. But that's part of the job. So let's jump to.
I had a quick question.
Yep, keep going.
So, did your music ever incorporate your music ever influence the level design at any point, or was it just like strictly you had to make music based on levels?
I think the only, I wouldn't say my music had any influence on the level design, but as a composer, I had influence on the level design. I know that might sound like a backwards way to answer. What on earth? No, don't do that. Wow, I just shut the game. Okay. I talked about flat structure earlier. Who asked that question? I can barely see it. Raise your hand. Like, okay. Yeah, I talked about the flat structure earlier, being able to give feedback. Like, if you're working at a big company like EA or Ubisoft, not those companies are bad, but like, the chances are they don't really give a crap about what the composer thinks about their very incredible game design. And that has its own strengths and weaknesses. Like, working for a big company like that, it's definitely strengths and it's definitely weaknesses. You can't build a game the way we built it in an organization like EA. Several of the gameplay segments, it's less about like the actual game design, it's more about the flow and pacing. I think composers would make excellent editors and vice versa, because I feel like the two disciplines are very, very, very similar. I think good editing can make or break a film, good editing can make or break a game. I think we're in an age where a lot of people don't finish the games that they play. I think you start it and then probably get 34% of the way through, and unless you really love the game, you're going to move on to the next thing that comes out. I mean, look at this week. We've got like Destiny 2 coming out on PC, Wolfenstein 2 coming out, Super Mario Odyssey coming out. I think there's something else as well. Right, thank you, Assassin's Creed. There we go. Like impossible to finish like all of the games. So unless it like really grabs you, it's not. You're probably just going to move on. And if you want to keep people's attention, you actually have to cut. I think a short game with less content, but the content is really, really, really like good throughout, is way better than a game filled with collect and effect. No offense to Assassin's Creed, but I've just invested too many hours into collecting those feathers someday. Yeah, so I think like my role, it's less like informing how the game plays. It's more just like, man, we spent a really long time in this one area, and I feel like there's nothing new happening. I feel like you need to cut out like this section here, or at least make this a little bit easier for the gamer to get through, so we're not just like stuck in this one area. There was one part in the Misty Woods, which is a weird part of the game, where there were like so many monsters, and you're not powerful enough to defeat them easily, so it just ends up becoming a chore. The place is called the Misty Woods. It should be about mystery, not about hammering X just to beat a bunch of monsters. In fact, if it had been up to me, I would have cut all the monsters entirely and made it a completely only puzzle-only section, but it's not up to me. But fortunately, I wasn't the only one with that concern. I raised the concern, other people agreed with me, and then the number of monsters got, I think, cut in half. So, yeah, I have more input, I think, than most composers would generally expect. Most of us composers are really just like, hey, here's the game, write some music, here's a list of files that we need, see you in 3 months. I worked on Ori for 3 years, so not full time, just like diving in and out. But like, so when it came to like actually doing the music for real, like towards the end, I kind of knew the game inside out. When you know the game inside out, it's so much easier to get the music done. And for you, like if you're working in visuals, you're probably going to be working on the game a lot longer than a composer. It's like music is usually the last thing to go in the project. I think it's a mistake, especially in games. In film, it makes a bit more sense, but in games, because it can really make or break the level of immersion. How many of you have played games where you turned off the music? Right. Don't worry, you can put your hand up. I won't be offended. That shouldn't be happening. But there's a reason you're turning off the music. It's because you're going to get bored of it, or this is something else you want to listen to. That shouldn't really be happening. Especially shouldn't be happening. I can maybe understand in multiplayer games, but it should never happen in a single player game ever. And that always has to do with pacing. I love The Witcher 3, but that whole soundtrack is written in the same key. It's written in D. The whole game is written in D, which after 100 hours gets a little bit tiring. And the reason they did it all in the same key is because it makes it very easy to transition from one piece of music to another, but it comes at a great cost, in my opinion. Like all the music starts to sound the same. It's really well produced music, but it's because it sounds the same, it has no emotional impact on me. Yes, Witcher 3 did have no emotional impact on me, despite the fact that I think it's a brilliant game. Yeah, that's like my role as a composer, is to think about like generally pacing and flow and things like that. Yes?
So usually when you're going to make some music for a scene,
yes,
like that scene for the album, then they just show like, okay, this is the scene, you have the album, or they put like some sort of placeholder music that they think will
I was very lucky again. I didn't have any temp music problems, so as the placeholder or temp music, yeah, most games will have like an idea of what they want their game to sound like. If they were going to put a placeholder track, they'd probably use something from Avatar and something from Studio Ghibli game. That's probably what they would use for this. But they didn't put anything in, they kind of left me to decide. And then again, if I had not been involved early in the game, there would have definitely been temp music. But so if I come on with like 1 year to go, because they have to present milestones to Microsoft, like milestones have to have music in them usually, at least like a placeholder, so the people who write the checks at Microsoft can like get it. So it has to have some kind of music in it. Much better that it's the composer's work in progress track rather than like, I don't know, putting in like a John Williams thing. Like as soon as you do that, you're instantly screwed because someone's gonna fall in love with it, and then you're gonna end up having to copy the temp track. And I'm sure if I did my education and research, I could do a decent job of sounding like John Williams. But at the end of the day, I'm not John Williams. I'm going to sound like second-rate John Williams. I want to sound like second-rate John Williams. I think anyone does. If I'm going to write like John Williams, I would just say like, hi, John Williams. But thankfully, I didn't have that problem. So instead of sounding like second-rate John Williams or Tom Newman or James Horner, thankfully, I ended up sounding like first-rate Gareth Coker.
So basically, leave open for you to interpret the scene.
Yes. So like with that example I showed you earlier, like the first version I showed you, that was my very first interpretation. Then I got a little bit of feedback in direction and was told that I needed to soften up a little bit, and I totally got it. And then I did the version 2, and then we saw it was on fun. So yeah.
So
yes, sir.
Is there ever when we were in the early development of the game or anything, was there ever that they couldn't come up with the idea for the gameplay and they asked you to just make some sound for the transition, or like, hey, we are not coming up with any ideas for the game. Can you make something like dangerous or like something soothing and then we work on the gameplay based on the music?
There is no part of the game that is based on the music. It's something we might look into for the second game. One platform game that does a fantastic job of this is Rayman Legends. If you haven't played Rayman Legends, you should, because it's an amazing visual game, and also the synergy. It's a little bit more cartoony than Ori, but that's not a criticism. It works perfectly for the game. But that's a great example of like where levels were clearly designed around music. I think if we were going to do it, I think like having a chase scene with like, which is timed to music, which would be a little bit cheesy for this, but puzzles tied to music, like, I'm thinking off the top of my head right now, but like, imagine like 5 different plates, and they all like have a musical note, and Ori like needs to hit them in a certain order to like open the door or something. That is something that would like easily inform the game design. But they basically said if you want to have a music puzzle in the game, make it, or at least write it down on paper, and we'll try it out, because we have a much bigger team now. That's the advantage of like having a successful first game. So if I come up with an idea, I can give it to a programmer, and the kind of stuff that I am coming up with is probably not very difficult to prototype. So I think for the second game there might be. I wouldn't know anything about that. Yes.
Going off of the topic.
Yes.
You didn't have time music. Instead, did the character have any references still that you wanted to do?
All the director told me is that he thinks James Horner is a genius and James Newton Howard is a genius. James Horner did the music for Avatar, Titanic. Those are the two main ones he's most famous for, which are 2 highest-grossing films of all time, so it's a pretty good track record. James Newton Howard has done tons of things. He does all of I can't pronounce his last name. Shyamalan. He's done all of his movies, he did all the Hunger Games movies. He's also a really good composer. That was literally the only two references. He basically just wanted it to sound like soft orchestral music, but it also needs to sound otherworldly. And my own personal reference for this game is the work by Michael Danner. Michael Danner is not a very famous composer, but he worked on a film that is arguably, like, at least at the time, was probably the pinnacle for VFX, Life of Pi. So, yeah, Michael Danner did the music for Life of Pi. He deservedly won the Oscar for that. That, probably for me, because he combines Ori. A lot of people say Ori is an orchestral score, it really isn't. It has an orchestra in it, but what makes Ori sound like Ori is all the other stuff that goes with the orchestra. There's actually a lot of synthetic sounds in Ori. It's just that they're well disguised and they sound kind of organic. But there's three elements. There's the orchestral element. That's kind of the glue that holds everything together to make it feel like a consistent soundtrack. Then there's the world music element, or the Michael Danner element. That's like what he's really well known for. Like all of the woodwinds, they're not like conventional woodwinds usually. They're usually woodwinds taken from around the world. One of the most popular tracks later in the game, the gameplay is themed around wind. So what kind of instrument do I use? A wind instrument. It's pretty basic stuff. But I use an Indian flute called a bansuri. It's a really cool instrument. It sounds a little bit more breathier. So it really feels, there's a track called Riding the Wind on the soundtrack, and that's kind of like what I want it to feel. So yeah, then there's the world music element, the orchestral element, and then the synthetic element. The only reason for the synthetic element is because I'm going to try and show an example of this. How are we doing for time? How long do I have? As long as you guys, you guys are just leaving if you want, I guess. Yeah, like the synthetic element is me taking acoustic instruments and then messing around with them. I'm going to try and show that a little bit after any more questions. So yeah, those three elements, like how I put the score together. But in terms of references, it was very, very limited. And again, because I respond to visuals, like that wasn't really a problem. Like we're just starting to get visuals in now for the second game, and you know, my brief for the second game is write a second melody that's as good as the first one, as if that like is something I can just grab off a tree. It's not that easy, unfortunately. Just kind of expand on what I built for the first game. And yeah, now that the visuals are coming in, I start to get an idea of what kind of instruments I'm going to use. Honestly, at the end of the day, it always comes, like the first thing I tackle is always the theme, because if you have a good theme, you can play it wherever you want, and it's always going to sound good. Of course, you have to have a good theme in the first place. One of my favorite composers, Jerry Goldsmith, his motto was, if in doubt, play the theme. There's a sports film he did called Rudy. It's a really cheesy sports film. But he literally plays the melody in like every key scene, and it totally works. But again, you have to have a good melody in the first place. Another good example is Forrest Gump. Forrest Gump uses one theme throughout the movie, just arranged in different ways. Now, on the other hand, I'm kind of going a bit into music territory, but films like Star Wars, Harry Potter have multiple characters and need multiple themes for them. But Ori's a singular game. It only needs a single theme, in my opinion. I think there was one review who said it would be nice to have a second theme, and I was just like, well, tough shit. But I mean, the thing is, if you guys, who has seen the trailer for the second game, raise your hand. If I can find it, I'll play it. In the second game, there is a secondary character. I just can't say anything more about it other than it's a secondary character. But having a secondary character, I can produce a second theme now. It'll be that's another opportunity to expand. Yes? Sorry. Go behind you first.
What's your method for doing it being like, you start with the melody?
Panic. honestly panic. Very current affairs. Well, not current affairs, but like it's just the fact that it happened like today. So I thought I'd written a really good theme. And then whenever I do that, I get suspicious because I'm like, well, someone else must have done this. Because we're only limited, there's only 12 notes in the scale. So there's a limit, there's really a limit to what you can do. And the chances are someone else has written it, or at least written something similar. I send it off, a lot of composer friends, I send it off to the ones who I trust the most. And then one comes back and it's like, it sounds a little bit too similar to this really famous film, which I have never seen, but like it means I just can't use it. And I have to start again and I panic again. There is really no method for creating a great melody. There's things you can do to improve your chances, like on a technical level, but honestly, and this is kind of what I tell people who are starting out, a lot of people, this kind of is going to tie into a different question, but like, a lot of people tell me like, what do you need to do when you're starting out in your career? And I just say, you have to finish stuff. You have to finish stuff. You can't just like have an idea or a sketch and not see it through to completion. I've got a folder on my hard drive which is just like stacked with ideas that I never committed to. And that's a bad habit to get into. It's a much better habit to finish something and it to be mediocre, but to get it finished so you can evaluate it, work out what's wrong, and how to make it better. So with that, I always try and write like 30 seconds of music every day, even if it's just a piano sketch, which is like a melody. Try and do something every day, and even if I think it's bad, I'm going to try and get it finished. That's kind of my approach with writing a melody. The more stuff you do, the more stuff you draw, the more stuff you paint, you're going to get better. But if you start stuff and don't finish it, you'll just end up with a bunch of unfinished ideas that you never committed to. But until once you commit to something and see it through, then you can actually learn. So what I'm looking for when I write music for a game, if I don't feel anything when I'm writing it, I'm never going to send it to the director. Never. I've never sent anything I myself didn't get an emotional response from. And that requires actually to be detached from the music, which fortunately I have no problem in doing. But for some composers it's very difficult because it might be like, oh, I put like 16 million hours into this piece of music and now I don't want to send it off because it might get rejected after 10 seconds. But if you want to improve your chances of not getting rejected, you have to like get out of the composer head and get into the gamer head. And that usually involves like taking a couple of days off. Once I finish a track, I leave it. Of course I think it's brilliant. It's the best thing ever. I'm going to win like 10 Oscars. And then I review it in 2 days, and then I'm like, oh, I guess I'm not going to win 10 Oscars. So, but then I try to improve it because I kind of like committed to that version, finished it, and I can revisit that and try and improve it. But yeah, if I'm not feeling anything, it never ever leaves my studio. Because if I'm not feeling anything, how can I expect you guys to feel anything? So that's why I said yes and no, because like at the initial phase of completion, if I'm feeling it, then yes, absolutely. Like I generally hope that you guys will get the same emotional response that I did. But like after the fact, like even the Will of the Wisps trailer.
What about with the audience at E3 when the audience was like stirred after you performed in the trailer?
Right, yeah.
That must have been a great
I performed the Will of the Wisps trailer live on stage at E3, and just before I went on stage, the head of marketing at Microsoft said, "Yeah, Gareth, there are 12 million people watching. Good luck." Which I performed live for 10 years, so that was a little bit crazy. But like, so in that moment, like like, the one thing I'm really glad is that I wasn't able to see the screen. I think if I'd been able to see the screen, it would have been difficult to get to the end, because it is quite a powerful scene at the end. I'm going to play it momentarily. But yeah, I wasn't able to see anything on the screen, so it was fine. The only other thing that would have like set me off is being able to see the audience. So the way the E3 stage worked is I'm sitting off stage at the piano, and then the stage is rotated on, which like feels like an eternity. So it just like rotates like as a machine. And at the beginning I'm off stage, and then gradually all of the audience's heads start like, oh, what's that? And I'm like, oh no. And I was just like, don't look at anyone. Don't look at anyone. And then it's difficult to do when the stage is moving because everything's new, and then once it stopped moving I was able to like get into tunnel vision mode, and it was fine. Yeah, had I been able to see the screen, it would have been tricky because it was still pretty fresh. That like 3-week period, like 3 weeks prior, we recorded the music for the first time. It was still fresh. Also in between that, I was recording the soundtrack for Ark Survival Evolved, and then when I got back from doing that, I was getting ready for E3. So it was like the last part of 3-part bit of craziness. Yeah, fortunately I was able to hold it together. But I knew like the first time I got that moment right, I knew it was going to work and be really powerful. I should probably play it now just for context.
Good segue.
I may have to go to the internet for this one. Give me a sec. Are there any other questions? You guys are so
I have one more question.
Yes.
Going back to the A/B testing you were having to do.
Yes.
To show the director the point, whatever. Do you ever find yourself even subconsciously biased when you're making the B version that you don't like and giving them like subpar quality as a demo because you have your hard time with it, like using it with that B.
That's my job. You've got to put your best. You've got to put your best work into every version. And again, it was just my initial reaction. Like I didn't have any direction for the version A, so like you know, it's appreciated sometimes to get a little direction. And honestly, it's in my interest to try something different anyway, because it might be better. So I do my best job to like try and execute the director's vision as well. Like, oh, hey, actually, this does work better. Yeah, I get where you're coming from. It can be difficult because like there are some things which I do feel strongly about. If I do feel strongly about it, I'll speak up. And yeah, I guess there's a bias, but like you still have to go and make it because it's kind of your job at the end of the day. All right, so here's the E3 trailer for the Will of the Wisps sequel. So, yeah, that's the Will of the Wisp trailer. One thing that like was another battle I had like with the teams, the first official battle of Will of the Wisp's development. Literally everyone was like, we've got to have the theme when Ori enters the scene. I'm like, no, you're all wrong. You're all wrong. We need to have the theme play when he puts his arm around the owl. I almost said the owl's name, but I can't even do that. Fortunately that was quite an easy thing to fix because this difference is only, the difference really is it's only like 1.5 to 2 seconds, but the emotional impact it has just by moving a musical phrase to it being on when he puts his arm around the owl as opposed to when he enters the screen is huge. And their reasoning for, I totally get their reasoning for doing it. And their reasoning was like, we're reintroducing Ori to the public after a 2-year absence. Oh, no. We're reintroducing, we're introducing a new game to the public, which is, which at least what I think this trailer shows is about the bond between two creatures. That's the most important. What's the most important thing? I'm having to be so careful with what I'm saying. It's about a bond between two creatures, and I'm like, that is what we are trying to sell here. Like people are going to know that this is Ori like after 3 seconds because I play the music at the very beginning of the game is actually a tie-in to the penultimate track of the first game. That's for the really observant people. There is actually a reason for that too. So I was like, can we just try it? Like, it's not going to cost me much time. Like, guarantee you, when we put the theme in and just hold that moment while Ori comes in, that like it'll really hit the audience really hard. The other benefit of doing that is a lot of people. And I told the team this. Because we were doing it at E3, honestly, I was kind of expecting a few people to cheer once Ori appeared, which of course, like if people are clapping, then if you play the theme at the same time, it's not going to hear it. Whereas like Ori appears, the clapping happens, yeah, we're amazing, and then people shut up and well, get back into it. But amazingly, no one actually made any noise, which is actually even better because it meant we did our job. Yeah, even though the difference was just like 2 seconds, like it made the world of difference. But it took like, that was like a week of like battles. And I did it with words initially, and I was like, no, what did we do the first time around? We just made version B, and I showed the rest of the team, and then it was unanimous. So, and that's like, just shows you what like such a tiny difference in music can make. And I wish I had the other example, but like I think you can probably imagine it. But like such a small difference in music can have a massive like change in emotional impact, which is like why I'm constantly testing things over and over and over again. Okay, so the last thing I wanted to do today, I know everyone said that it was like a live performance. I wanted to take it one step further. Just give me 1 second. And I was so many cables here, I need to remember which one. Okay, so, like I said, I did say that we're going to do live performance. I'm going to take it one step further. I'm going to do, hopefully very quickly, live composition.
Wow.
With your input. Now that might sound really crazy, but I'm just going to show you like the reason for it, because this is like how I create a lot of the tracks for Ori. I wanted to show you like once I talked about a singular idea and like having an idea for like what the game should be and like having a vision. And I told you that the first thing I write is there any way we can turn that light down a little bit? Sorry. Like the first thing I come up with is a theme, and that makes it like super easy for me to create like other tracks for the game. So what we're going to do is I'm going to get you guys to give me some chords, and I get one veto basically. Basically choose. Also, does anyone have a pen? I need a pen and paper, just so I can remember what you guys do. And I'm going to very quickly like try and put something together that sounds Ori-esque based on the chords that you guys have chosen. And I prefer the suggestions to come from people who are not musical, because otherwise the music people are going to give me really difficult chords, and that's just not fair. Okay, so again, this is kind of a cheat. Like, if there are any composers here, they'll know I'm making this a little bit easier for myself. So again, raise your hand if you're not a full-time working musician. Yes, if you're not a full-time working musician. Okay, great. So all of you guys, and if you are a full-time musician, or you work, are there other full-time working musicians? Okay, all right. You no input from you. I don't trust you guys. Sorry. Okay, so you're going to get to choose just 4 chords. Most of Ori's music is very simple. I'm usually only using like 4 to 5 chords in a 3-minute track, and I usually like to develop it with instruments rather than like doing it compositionally, like writing the melodies and the harmonies. So I use like 4 chords and use them in all kinds of different ways. First off, pick a letter between A and G. Anyone? Who was the first? All right. What was it?
E.
Oh, thank you. Fantastic. All right. Next up, major or minor?
Minor.
Okay. Oh, that's great. Thank you. All right. So that's the first chord. Next up, anything between A and G? D. D again? Yeah, you can't be the same. Someone said A, that's too easy, let's do F. It's going to be interesting. Major or minor?
Major.
Oh, thank you. It was going to be tricky if someone said minor. Okay. Next up, A and G?
C.
Nice. Major or minor? Ooh. You did get one veto. But I think so. I think I can do it. Last one between A and G. No flats or sharps. Fine. Okay. What was the flat? Come on. Bring it. B flat. That is really friendly. Thank you. And I'm going to use my veto here and make it major. Okay.
Diminished?
No. Honestly, diminished chords, like in Ori, there isn't one. So, like, most of the harmony in Ori is very simple. So, let me fire it back in. Okay, so. Yeah, so like a diminished chord is. You're never hearing that sound in Ori. Like, most of the chords are minor, major. And sometimes we add an extra note, which is called a 7th. So this is a minor with a 7th top note. Sometimes we add in major, that's the 7th again. And then what really is the Ori sound is what we call adding the 9th, which is minor, and then the 7th, and then the 9th. It's kind of a Japanese sound, slightly jazzy. That's and that's like what we use for most of the harmony in the game. So the chords you guys have given me are D minor, F major, C minor, which is kind of a pain in the ass one, and E flat major. So D minor, F major, it's actually quite nice. It was more nicer than I was expecting. And B flat major. So all I'm going to do, I'm going to do this as best I can. Normally I'm doing this on like a 43-inch screen with like another 15-inch screen in front of me and like all of my tools. And this like laptop, my computer is 18 cores and 36 threads, so like, this is like not as powerful. So there's also a massive latency between like when I press the keys and the sound coming out of the speakers, but I'm going to do my best. Okay. So generally, right, you've given me the harmony, so I'm just going to outline it, like probably just by doing some simple chords. Oh, tempo. That's very important. I spent all that time talking about how important tempo is, and I didn't decide it. Let's just moon span. Yeah, that's not right. I'm just going to set it to the tempo that the original main theme is at, just to make my life easier. I still don't know how to turn off notifications in Windows 7. Okay. Is there a button to turn the wall off? Yes. Go away. Thank you. Okay. Windows 10 sure loads its notifications. Alright, so that's the chords you use, and you notice I've already made one addition, so F, C minor. Alright, so the addition I made, that's the ninth, which I added in because it just sounds pretty awesome, and that's like the only addition I made. If you want, I can get rid of it, it'll just sound better, trust me. But it's still like a harmony you chose. Alright. Pick an instrument. Marimba, block, crotals, or harp?
Harp.
Wow, that's a name. That's crazy. Okay. So I'm going to do kind of a similar thing, I think. So this is about texturability. Like again, because I don't have all of my stuff here, I don't have access to every sound I would normally use, but I'm doing the best I can as quickly as I can. So what I kind of do with the harp is like outline the same chords that you guys chose, just played them in a different way. So. Oh yeah, also another little thing. One of the big things about Ori's sound is that I use reverb a lot. So reverb is like how long it takes for a sound to die away. So like this room actually has a pretty strong reverb. Like if you clap your hand, like the sound takes quite a long time to die away. That's exactly quite a good room for music. But for Ori, like even that is like way too short. Like the ideal reverb for Ori honestly is about 3 to 4 seconds for the sound to completely die away, which is like a really big constable sound. And sometimes I like to take that even further. So like here's the harp. I don't know if you can hear it. Okay, so this is the harp with no reverb. Goes away reasonably quickly. Now with the Magic Secret Sauce Ori reverb, which I've been using for a long time, has a different like quality to it. It might be too much, but that sounds good. The chords you chose, like it already starts to feel a bit more like Ori. So I'm going to record that. So that sounds cool. Oops. Is that click not too loud? It's not bothering you? See how it sounds with the piano, maybe it sounds like garbage. Let's see. Hear it? Shut up. Okay. So the next thing I'm going to do is like there's no bass in the score in the track yet, so tempo quick change because it's looking a little bit fast. Okay. That note in there, which I'm just going to try and filter right now. Oh my god, this screen is so small. This is terrible. This is a big difference. Normally I'm working in 43 inches at 4K, and this is like 1080, which is like nothing. Even though the notes are there. We go. Okay. That is fine. That's got to go. Goodbye. Okay. Alright. Let's see. Marimba or block? Because it's my laptop, my cowbell isn't here. So sorry. Next time, I'll bring a real cowbell. Bring a real cowbell. And you can net it. Alright, so. So again, I'm going to do kind of a simple thing. I talked about earlier, like it's important for music to have momentum, especially in a game like Ori, which is a platformer. So one of the things I do a lot is I have a lot of ostinatos in the score. Ostinato is a repeated rhythmic pattern that just plays constantly over and over again. Now, an ostinato might just sound like. It sounds fine, but like I try to find ways to make it interesting. One of the first things I do is I add a delay on it. And what a delay does is it repeats the sound, just like a slightly reduced volume. Hopefully this works. I have no idea what it's going to sound like because the speaker's like in front of me, but it's okay. That's the wrong sound. Okay. You can kind of hear how the sound like is dying away slowly, but it takes too long to die away.
sec. So, I think it sounds okay. Now, one of the other things I like to do, and this is where like I was talking about the different elements like the orchestra, the world music, and oh, it's gone off. I've been speaking for so long, the battery's dead. We're close to finishing, so thank you. Am I back? Yeah. Okay. Let's continue. I like to take that exact sound and they're always asking me, hey, can you make it sound more magical? Well, what does more magical actually mean? It's like, can you make it sound more green? Like, it's just like, I get where they're coming from, so it's like, it's my job to figure that out. So one of the cheapest tricks in the book is, we got this audio. Hopefully it will sound like a remove the delay. Turn the horrible play off. Okay, so one of the things I like to do. Any of the composers here can guess what I'm going to do? So what I'd like to do also is have it play backwards and forwards at the same time, because it's kind of cool effect. You have to bear with me for like 60 seconds while I make this work. Oh, this is so difficult with touchpad and small screen. Forward and backward. There's no guarantee this will work, and that's okay. Well, I've done this before, so I think it will.
Do you have any feelings about ending a song on a note that's reversed, so it kind of comes up to like a reverse crescendo where you have that backwards?
Oh, I do that all the time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Beautiful.
Do this individually because I don't trust. Let's see how that sounds. So that you're hearing it like both forward and backward, and it kind of works. Like honestly, I could probably play around with just that sound for forever. Like just without the chords. Let's go back to what you guys did. So this sounds cool, but it could sound cooler with the special sauce Oreo reverb. At least I hope it will. see how it sounds with the strings. It's too loud. It's the piano guys, not the strings, idiot. Is this interesting, by the way? I'm just like, okay. We're kind of like reasonably in Ori space in like little to no time. Like again, if I had my own computer here, I could do like the whole thing in like 2 hours and just on composing track. But now here's where it comes back to the theme. Now the chords you guys chose have never been used in accompaniment to the theme. So, but I think it's going to be pretty easy to make it work with the theme. So the theme, as you know, those of you who played the game, the theme is. I can't. Just means that like part of the thing. So I'm just going to play this on loop and we'll see what happens. Hard to pan. Oh, it's so small. Here's D minor, F major, C minor, B flat major with the theme on top. So I have to change it a little bit, but that's okay. Like, all the people really need to hear, like, people here just hear. That's enough. Like, that's enough to like, oh, I'm going to like, that's the great thing about like, having a good melody. You can use like the whole thing, or you can just use fragments of it. And then if it's not working with the new chords that you guys give me, I just write something else. It doesn't have to be like perfect, it just has to feel like it's part of the same melody. So that's what I'm trying to do. See how that sounds. Probably okay. I don't know if the room is going forward, so let's see what it sounds like without it. Because if you hear a melody too often in game music, it gets really, really annoying. I would probably let's just copy that several times. It's a lot of copying and pasting in composing, it's great. I'm serious. This is one of the most important lesson I learned is don't be afraid of repetition. Like everyone tells you, oh, it's bad to have a repeated idea in game. It's only a bad idea if you know, it's only a bad idea to have a repeated melody if the melody is bad. And it's your job as a composer to know if what you bring is actually good. It's one of the big things. Well, I'm quite big on being harsh with yourself and self-evaluating my own work. Like, whenever I listen to something, like in terms of production quality, like, at the end of the day, my work is going to be judged like next to John Williams or Hansen or whoever. Like, and I'm not quite at that level in terms of like the sound quality, but like it's, you know, it's something like I want it to sound as expensive as the work that they're producing. Of course, you can't always have a budget that they're usually working with, but like that's always the goal. I think it's like super important to be self-aware of the level of your own work because it helps you know what you need to improve. Okay, so we've got a really simple composition here. So this section right here, can you see anything? Yeah, so this section right here, just the A section. That like long middle section is the B section, which is where I'm just going to improv. And then we'll do the A section again, that didn't come out there. Okay. So, just going to play along. We'll see what happens. It might be a disaster. So I have a touchpad. All right. There we go, I did that now. I've never composed any improv before, and like, generally the only thing that was kind of planned was like the palette, like the instruments, because otherwise I just would spend like hours trying to find the right one. But like you guys gave me the chords, obviously I have a melody as well, but like it's, once you have like the instruments and a melody, it's actually pretty easy to put things, at least for me, it's pretty easy to put things together. So just the last thing before we finish, we have this raffle. So the prizes on offer are both currently unavailable to the public. So I've got there'll be 2 winners, and each will get one Ori and the Will of the Wisp poster, which is it's alright. But the other, and this is sold out currently, is the Ori vinyl. It's sold out. And in fact, I'm almost out of promo copies as well. So I think there are only probably about 5 more copies left available in the entire world. So, all right. Are you? Yes. They can be. I want to give you guys the choice, whoever wins, to sign in, because obviously this is pretty beautiful artwork and I don't want to mess it up. So, all right, you all have your numbers.
Anybody not have a number? Oh, Keaton. How you doing?
Alright, so the posters first. Should I make it vinyl first? Like I said, neither of these you can get anywhere at the moment. Probably the poster will be available later. But okay, first number is number 30. The poster.
Like with a D, like 30?
30, yes. Second poster. Number 14. All right, final number 1. I'm 32. No one's claiming? 32.
32. Oh, it might still be.
Great, it's fine. 27. Okay. All right, last one. Did I not pick a single actual student? Okay.
You totally deserve that.
Thank you very much. Do you guys have any more questions, like either about music stuff or career stuff? I can also give advice on. So
We'll be here all night.
I have some siblings that are actually very interested in getting into music and sound design for games. They find it very difficult compared to like the career that I'm taking in art. There's kind of like a clear path for music and sound design, and it's much more ambiguous.
You mean path for music and sound design is ambiguous?
No, just I guess the learning path, like the building up yourself as an artist.
Yeah, I mean, I guess, yeah, you're right. In fact, honestly, with music and sound, you need to build up your credits as early as possible, because, and this is why I talked about with finishing stuff, like even if that means working on stuff for free, which frankly you should be doing when you're a student, because you're a student. I think I have a little thing I want to show. Yes, okay, I can actually show this. Alright, this is kind of beneficial for everyone, so like, there isn't really like a set path into game audio, but the one thing that will guarantee your work is finishing stuff. And the way I got almost every gig that I've got in games was because I started by submitting my work on a site called moddb.com back in 2010. It's a pretty small corner of the internet. So, from one of the mods, I worked on about like 5 or 6 different projects for free. None of them were that great, but like they were still got finished. Anyway, one of the mods, one of the guys making the mod decided to make a game called Primal Carnage, which is a dinosaur multiplayer shooter game. It's alright, it's pretty fun. So that game was like my first paid gig, which I got from doing a mod for free. Now, because I worked on Primal Carnage, one of the programmers who was working on Primal Carnage got bored of working on the game and decided to start his own company and made another game called Momentum, but he loved the music that I'd already done for Primal Carnage, so he hired me for Momentum. Oh, this gets way better. This gets way better. Okay. And that game came out before Primal Carnage. So now these two games, they're both really small indie games. They didn't pay anything up front, but I got some back-end royalties on them, which is it's more common practice, especially in indie games now. Like, you finish the game, you give you a percentage of the game sales. So that's why I got on both these two games. So then, from Primal Carnage, might seem like a stretch to go from Primal to Ori. There should be an arrow from moddb to Ori as well. But like, the director of Ori found my work initially on moddb.com. And he just like randomly wrote to me and said, yeah, I really like the music that you put online. Would you be interested in writing music for our prototype? It wasn't even called Ori back then, it was called something else. I was like, yeah, sure, I'll check out your game and I'll do the prototype for free. And so if you do the prototype for free and we have a successful pitch, you can do the music for the game. And so obviously we did get a successful pitch and that became Ori and Blind Forest. It all started because I worked on the game for free. It gets way better. It's like this is just the beginning. So after Primal Carnage came out, the studio made another game called Mean Greens, which is like a really silly, over-the-top green army men multiplayer shooter. Sold about 150,000 units on PC, which is very good for an indie game. Then I can't even remember what's next. Oh yeah. So the company making Mean Greens also designed all the creatures for Ark Survival Evolved. There's 127 creatures in Ark Survival Evolved. And the Ark guys were like, well, do you know a composer? And they were like, yeah, we know a composer. He's worked on 2 games for us already. And then so I ended up working on Ark Survival Evolved. Now, just to give you an idea of the scale of this, right, MontyB, I'm like in my crappy 1-bedroom, not even 1-bedroom studio apartment with like no room and not even an air conditioner. Yes, I lived in LA for like 4 years without an air conditioner. I don't know how I managed that, especially after today. But then like, once Ark came out, you know, like so I'm doing stuff all on my computer with no real instruments. Ark is like literally the opposite. It's been a very successful early access game, and they sent me to Abbey Road, which is in London, which is where the Beatles recorded, which is where Star Wars was recorded, where Lord of the Rings was recorded, where Harry Potter was recorded. They gave me an orchestra of 93 players for 3 days. So, from MontyB, Abbey Road. It's quite good. It gets better. This is really important because I want to illustrate to you guys like how like you guys might be thinking about career prospects like after you graduate. You just never ever know where one like seemingly tiny thing can lead. So I can't even remember what this is. Oh yeah, okay. So the sound designer for Mean Greens got hired by Insomniac Games to work on their VR title, The Unspoken. So I now ended up working on. The sound designer from the Mean Greens contacted me and said, would you like to pitch for this virtual reality magic game called The Unspoken, which is by Insomniac Games? And I pitched, and I won the pitch. I think I was competing against 5 other composers. And so, because of a connection I had from a game that I worked on earlier, I got to work with Insomniac Games, and I'm still working with them now. And then, back to Ori and the Blind Forest. Ori and the Blind Forest is published by Microsoft. Microsoft make a lot of games. They make Minecraft. And the head of audio thought my music would be a good fit for Minecraft, because it's quite ambient in nature. Now, the core game of Minecraft that has music that was done years and years and years ago by C418. But since Microsoft bought it, they wanted to change up the direction. I think C418 is still doing some music for the game, but the work that I'm doing is on the console edition of the game. And since then, I've done Minecraft Greek mythology, which is basically a Greek-themed reskin of the Minecraft map. They have this mini-game called Battle, which is basically, it's just like a free-for-all deathmatch based in the Minecraft world with custom maps. That's about another 2 hours of music. I did Chinese mythology last year, that's another hour of music. This year they released a mini-game called Glide, which makes use of the flying mechanic. And also there's another one that isn't there. I can probably get away with saying we're doing another mythology next month, which I really need to start writing. So yeah, there's another mythology. So again, from Ori, there's been 5 separate Minecraft things. And yeah, obviously it culminates in Ori and the Will of the Wisps. And who knows what beyond. And literally all of these projects came because I just worked on a mod for free when I was a student. It's a very long-winded way to your answer, but the path to getting work is to do work. I know that that sounds weird, but if you can't find there are so many people who are trying to make games, and even if they're just little mods, sometimes they can be a prototype for something very, very cool. How did the Portal team get hired? Because they made a mod, and then Valve hired the entire team. At least I think that's the story. You only need to have one of these to have an entire career. Now, if you have 2 of those at the very top, you might be ended up being overwhelmed with work. Of course, the one important factor in all of this, you have to make sure you do a good job on each game. Because if you don't, then you won't get hired again and they won't remember you. But if you do a good job, people will remember you and people want to hire people who they've worked with before, and they want to hire people, the number one way you get hired is by recommendations from your friends. So I hope that illustrates my path. The only other path, in terms of music, is to get an internship for summer. I interned for a very, 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 very major film composer, and I figured out after 2 weeks that I was terrible at it. I am not built to make coffee for other people, and the low point for me was when I was asked to take his CD collection and import it into iTunes. I was like, I'm done. It wasn't for me. It was probably because I was 26. I think if you're 21, 22, it's worth considering doing an internship, but I'm not sure how that works in the VFX world, but in terms of music and sound, it's a very viable way to get work, because you can also learn a lot on the job. I chose to go it alone. Also, by going it alone, you're going to learn a lot from experience. It's just going to be, the road's going to be a little bit rockier. Ultimately, you have to do the work. That's all I'd say. Hope that helps a little bit.
No, that was very helpful.
Any other questions? Yes.
Could you briefly go over your context on
Could I briefly go through what, sorry?
Go over your context on
I can't hear you, sorry.
your sound library?
My sound library? Not here because it's not, this is just my laptop. But if you're asking me what software do I use, I literally use everything. I've spent way too much. So for the VFX people, you all have your software, you're probably using Max, Maya, all of these, Photoshop, all of that other stuff. Composers have a ton of software as well. It's obscene how much money one has to spend just to make, you heard the strings that I use, for example, that's like 50 gigabytes of space, like just for streams. The piano is another 30 gigabytes. And imagine like that transferring to whole orchestra. I need like 10 terabytes of storage just to run like all of the sounds. That's like nothing for an artist. It's just a lot for like a video person probably. Yeah, in answer to your question, I use everything. If you want the really nerdy answer, I would just say Spitfire Audio is my favorite. Next question. There's someone else. Someone? Yes? I mean, I literally have all of them, so... any other questions?
Top 3 composers?
In games or in film or just in general?
In general. If you had to be on a desert island with like 4 or 5 composers, soundtracks, whatever.
Okay. James Horner did Titanic and Avatar. And Braveheart. Braveheart's one of my favorite soundtracks ever. Ravel, because he is the foundation for almost all film and game music as we hear it today. I'd be lying if I said I couldn't live without rocking out to some of Hans Zimmer's music, because it's pretty awesome. Did any of you go to this concert? It's the most incredible, like, it was the best concert I think I've ever been to. Like, who thought a film composer could be like a complete rock star? And he really doesn't look like one either. Kind of looks like my uncle, so. Let's see, Hans Zimmer, James Horner, Ravel, Michael Tanner, and from games, Jesper Kidd, who did Assassin's Creed. The early Assassin's Creed, which has the best music.
Yep.
The later stuff has good music, but it doesn't have the personality of the yes. Jesper Kidd also did Hitman. He did Borderlands. I think he's a genius. So. Anything else?
Is there like a community of like people who work sound on video games?
Yes. Yes, the best one. Yeah, the best one is called Game Audio Network Guild. There's memberships for students and for there's student level membership and there's professional level membership. I think there's 5,000 members and like the best of the best are members of that guild. So yeah, it's just called GANG for short. It's Game Audio Network Guild. You'll easily find it online. And yeah, check it out. They have a lot of amazing resources, including, that might be a good resource to check out for you as well. Yeah, they've got contracts, they've got, and you can get like there's tons of tutorials and just like tons of links to everything. And they meet up every year at the Game Developers Conference as well. Do you have anything else?
Just one last thing for, so do you think, is there any sort of like, I don't know, like, rivalry for people who do sound for film, sound for game, you guys just social tonight, whenever interact?
Sorry.
Sound for film and sound for game.
Is there a rivalry?
It's interesting because like they are very similar disciplines. Like the only difference between the two in terms of music is like one form is non-linear and the other isn't. Like when I'm doing a cutscene, it's literally the same thing as doing a film. Like the timing is exactly the same. So the sound design is just way more technical. Like doing a mix of a game, like the way you play Ori is going to be different to the way I play Ori. It's going to be different to the way someone else plays Ori. And so in terms of mixing and making sure the music and attack sounds and dialogue are all sounding good, that's a lot more technical and it's very difficult. But it's still the same principle. Ultimately, their job is to make the thing sound good. So you know, it's funny. I always get asked the question like, what gear do I use? And the most important ones. These, like, you've got to learn how to trust these. Like, critical listening is like the most important skill any sound person can have. In terms of competition, I mean, again, I think that there's a lot of overlap. Just to give you an example, Ori's sound designer, his first gig was working as an assistant sound editor on some film called The Matrix. So he worked on The Matrix, and of course, I guess he did a good job because then he was supervising sound editor on Reloaded, or not supervising, it was like a higher position sound editor on Matrix Reloaded and Revolutions. Then, because of his work on that, he got picked up because there's a lot of creatures and monsters and cool robot sounds. He got tabbed by Electronic Arts, and then his next gig was Dead Space. And then he did all the Dead Space games. And he ended up doing some Call of Duty stuff as well. And that's like, Ori. That's a logical follow-on from Dead Space and Call of Duty and The Matrix. But it was just like the contrast was something nice to work on. But like, I don't think there's a competition. I think there's definitely mutual respect because it's incredibly hard to make a game sound good. The best sounding game, if you've got good speakers, of the last, no, ever. I'm going to commit to ever is the Star Wars Battlefront game. I don't think the game is that engaging to play, but in terms, and I haven't played the new one, I'm talking about the one that was released 2 years ago, but on a presentational level, they nailed the Star Wars feel and sound. I don't know how they did it, because there's so much going on. It's not like there's a lot going on in a Star Wars movie when there's a dogfight, but in the game, there's like 10 times as much going on, and it still sounds super clean. Yeah, if you want an audio treat, play the Star Wars Battlefront games. But yeah, sign up for the Game Audio Network Guild, and there's a ton of resources there.
Any questions? Is the other?
Okay, I have one question. I want to say something.
Okay.
But my question was actually just what makes you decide between using visual instruments and real instruments?
Well, the first thing is obviously money, because hiring real players does cost money. That said, even if there isn't money nowadays, like I'll make a bet, like hiring a player will generally cost between about like $40 to $100 an hour, depending on the ability of the player. Of course, if you're hiring a superstar, I hired Tina Guo, who's a cello player. She played at Hans Zimmer's concert, and she costs 4 figures per hour. So I think anytime you have a live element, you're adding humanity. Like there's only so much a computer can do. Like the reason why we're drawn to certain paintings or we're drawn to certain music is because the human element that's in a piece of music. I always think that like having more humanity in whatever you're doing can elevate the performance. That was deep.
You want to say something?
I just wanted to say, because I had a good feeling that the moment you got there, you'd be like, thank you, and then no one would say thank you to you. So I wanted to say everybody needs to thank Andrea for giving a round of applause or something. She put this together, and that's super amazing.
Thanks you guys, but especially thank you. Thank you. I think this was, well, I don't know.
But I have to ask, like, because again, most of you are working in VFX, so like, is it because there are probably more composers who would love to do this? I'm serious. Like, so if this is something that is of interest, obviously you don't want to be doing it every month, but like, maybe you should, but like,
Would we be interested in having other people come here?
yes, exactly. That's my point. Okay, thank you.
And compose music for us. But thank you so much. This was fantastic. Thanks all of you guys for coming and staying and asking such great questions. And I hope everyone goes off and does their homework all inspiring. Yeah, I'm looking forward to that. But thank you, Gareth.
Oh yeah, no problem.